PAM, Program Administration Manual. We are going to start talking today about TC requirements, their contracts, how to renew things, and things of that nature. So as we're going through, if you guys have questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you. To start, my name is Andrew with CPR Instructor Affiliates, powered by Prime Medical Training. We're doing this series to help clear up any kind of misinformation that's out there. There's a lot of people that say things that are in the PAM that really aren't there, and vice versa. So we just are going section by section through the PAM and reading it off, explaining what actually is in there, and then also interpreting that and explaining how it applies practically in day-to-day life. So PAM, found in the AHA Instructor Network. Under TC policies and procedures, we'll talk about managing a TC agreement. So every training center has an agreement with the AHA, and there's a contract, and that contract stipulates lots of things, one of which is what disciplines the training center is allowed to teach. BLS, ACLS, PALS. To my knowledge, I've never heard of a Heart Saver only training center. So it's one of those three. And then it also dictates where a training center can teach. And traditionally, training centers were given usually either a state that they could train in. So whatever state they were located in is the state they could train in. Sometimes they were given a region, especially if you were a entrepreneurial training center. You might have like your state and the states surrounding your state. And then there were a very few handful out there that had a national status, and it allowed them to teach and have instructors all over the country. However, now, at least for entrepreneurial training centers, I'm not so sure about hospitals and EMS systems and stuff like that, but definitely for entrepreneurial training centers, the contracts are now stating that they can train in all 50 states, and that's just become the standard now. And so it used to be that when when training centers would renew their contract, it was done every 2 years. And then after, when that 2-year period rolled around, they had regional faculty, which doesn't exist anymore, but there would be a regional faculty member who would go and contact the TC, and they would monitor them in a class and just look over their paperwork, all of that kind of stuff, and then they would renew. The AHA did away with regional faculty, and about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, so back in 2018-ish, and they implemented more streamlined ways of renewing a TC. So because of the e-cards, you have the surveys that students have to take, and the AHA, kind of justified getting rid of regional faculty because now they had real-time data that they could monitor and evaluate using those evaluations and the scores that training centers and the individual instructors would receive through those evaluations. And so with that, they also did away with the 2-year contracts. Now they call them Evergreen Contracts, which means that the training center will continue to run indefinitely until the training center or the AHA decide to shut it down, and they can do that for any reason or no reason at all. And you just needed to give a 30-day notice to each other before that happens. And so that's kind of the way the training center agreement and the way the AHA has set things up moving forward. But there's also a couple other things, like usually to become a training center now, which we talked about all the criteria in the last video. But one of the criteria as well is course monitoring. So occasionally the AHA will monitor a course. Traditionally, they'll do it when you first become a training center. They'll send somebody to monitor you, whether virtually or in person. And then they also will they reserve the right to drop in on classes and monitor you with or without notice. It doesn't happen super often, and it probably would only happen if there was cause for them to be concerned about something. I have heard of them doing this. And back in the day, they used to do like secret shopper type things. I've heard of that happening. They also have their own staff that they may send out to monitor a class. So it does happen, though very rare. And again, like I said, it probably doesn't happen unless there's a reason for them to do that at this point. You can't transfer a training center agreement, and that's fairly well known. What's interesting though is even though you can't transfer an agreement, there's nothing preventing you from buying another training center. Like they can't keep you from buying the rights to a logo, to all these other things, the book of clients and whatnot. However, technically you are supposed to, if you buy a company and they happen to be an AHA training center, you're supposed to reapply to be a training center, and they go through the whole process of evaluating you and then, giving you a new training center ID number. I would suspect that it is not a difficult process. If you already are a solid training center, there's not been any issues in the past with the training center, I would think that that's a pretty fluid process and just paperwork, and they do that for legal reasons. But nonetheless, it can and does happen where training centers are bought out and agreements are either dissolved or reapplied for. In our So let me get back over to here where it talks about adding disciplines. Same thing. If you want to add a discipline, if you're a BLS and you want to add ACLS and or PALS, you're going to have to reapply and go through the whole process again. In our case, it took us about a year for the first to get our BLS training center status, and then the next time it only took, I would say, 4 months. So to get ACLS and PALS, but it is a process. It does take time for paperwork to move. I do know that in certain instances they'll expedite that process, but just generally speaking, it can be a little bit of a lag. Terminating a TC agreement. If you ended up having to terminate your agreement with the AHA for one reason or another, maybe you got bought out by another training center or you're ready to retire, they require you to send a 30-day notice to all of your instructors. They require you to unalign all the instructors before you close down. They will reclaim your cards and they will refund you for whatever cards have not been claimed or sent to students. So there is that. It's interesting, actually, in our contract, it says that they don't reimburse unsent cards, but in the PAM, it says that they do. So obviously, one of the two is out of date. I'm inclined to think that the PAM is probably more in date than their legal document. But yeah, so that can happen and does happen where training centers close, and so you have 30 days to basically take care of business, let everybody know, unalign everybody, and then get your reimbursement check from the AHA. So those are kind of the nitty-gritty details about renewing, about becoming a training center, maintaining a training center status, adding disciplines, closing a training center agreement. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have related to that. I've been through it. I have both been through opening a training center, adding disciplines, and I've purchased another training center and had to dissolve it. So on every front, I've had some experience with that, and I would be happy to offer insight to anybody who would like to ask. You can hit me up on social media. You can shoot me an email to andrew@primemedicaltraining.com, or just leave a comment below, and I'd be happy to do that. If you haven't already, I'd recommend checking out our YouTube page, CPR Instructor Affiliates, and subscribing. We put out content regularly to help aid CPR instructors across the country be more informed to grow and build and run successful CPR companies. So we'd love to hear from you, and look forward to coming back tomorrow to continue on this series of delving into the PAM. Thanks, and have a good night.